Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Housing Law live stream for the 7th of October 2024. I'm here with Mike and Karis, and Shannon's away this week again. She's on holiday this week, so hopefully we'll see her next week. But it's just the three of us for today. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Housing Law live stream for the 7th of October 2024. Right, that's better. Sorry, I was getting myself in the other ear. So, how is everybody today?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Interesting week. A couple of questions I've got for you guys tonight.
And Karis, we were just, before we went live, we were just having a chat about supported housing, which we can continue. And I must apologise to you as well, anyone out there as well, because I was planning to do lots of homework and prepare for this session, but unfortunately I didn't. But I thought maybe we'll just plod on and have a chat and make it a sort of relaxing space that people can hopefully join in with, and it doesn't have to be like a sort of lecture in a theatre or a lecture theatre or something. But I will try and sort of prepare for it better in the future. It's just so difficult when doing casework that it's difficult to say I can't do a letter requiring a local authority to house somebody because I've got to sort of prepare for my live stream. It sounds a bit unrealistic. So shall I actually got a couple of comments that have been put up live. Been put up before the show. So I encourage everyone with YouTube, you can go to the post which I'll generally put up in advance, and then you can leave comments which come through. So let's see if this comes through. I've got to just set it up so that we get a comment. Oh yeah, sorry, it's here. It may take a minute. So can everybody, I'll just make it a bit smaller. And then see, in the future I'll be more professional. I'll have this set up before.
Well, there's a second part to it as well, yeah? There's
yes.
2 parts.
So this is the first, this is the first part, isn't it? So it's from Charlie, and Charlie says, for those of you old enough to remember that, does the duty to rehouse residential occupiers, Section 39 Land Compensation Act 1973, apply to private tenants of a housing association if a block of flats is decanted? And it carries on. They have a short hold tenancy agreement with the housing association, private tenants, but they are, not social housing tenants, not assured tenancy. Thank you. I don't know if you guys have a sort of working knowledge of the Land Compensation Act 1973, because I don't. But I mean, shall we have a look?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, but I've heard it been discussed before, and I'm pretty sure unless it says something in the tenancy, as in that the tenants will be decanted in such and such circumstance, then I don't think so. But I'm happy to be wrong about that.
So let's just go back to the beginning there. And it says, does the duty to rehouse apply to private tenants if a block of flats is decanted? So sections, shall I just get this up on the Google it? I mean, we may not be able to answer this because if it's not clear, I mean, and forgive me, Charlie, it presumably isn't that clear. Otherwise, you wouldn't be asking if it sort of jumps out from the page when you Google it. Section 39 Land Compensation Act. Okay, here we go. So shall I share that? I think I can. It'll just take me a minute. Hang on. If I go to here and I move, I think I can do this, and I can then put in a widget here so we can share the screen. Where's it gone? Open.
Well, whilst we was finding, I guess the question might be whether you can essentially write to them as a landlord, and just essentially not be very patient with them. So if they give you a quick response, then start the complaints process, just politely, but just kind of make the point that actually it's very important for you to know this ASAP. And if there, I mean, yeah, as I say, what I've heard from people talking about before is if there's nothing in there at all, it means that that they don't have to decant someone. Um, but if they do, it will be in there. So I think that's kind of what you want to be looking for, is anything at all within that tenancy agreement, assuming you've actually been given the tenancy agreement, which sometimes doesn't happen. But just kind of check that out. It's a bit of an odd idea that social housing landlords have private tenants, but we've seen that in Bedford as well.
That's a little bit small, that widget. I'll make this bigger, like that. A bit messy, but can you see that? Whoops.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll just
As you
lock
say,
it.
it's slightly small, but it's probably fine on YouTube actually.
Okay, let's lock the overlay and then
Yeah,
I
it's fine
can
on YouTube.
scroll down. So what does it say? It says, oh God, I can't write. I have to read it over here. So where a person is displaced from residential accommodation on any land in consequences of the acquisition of land by an authority possessing compulsory purchase powers, but it's not that one. The making of a housing order, it's not that one. Where the land has been purchased. So there's three sections there. So and suitable accommodation is not otherwise available. Then it doesn't look to me as if. Sorry, if I scroll down here, it makes more sense because I'm just looking at these three things, which would be where you qualify. Am I missing something? Do you think that it doesn't say where you're decanted?
No, I mean, I guess a question for Charlie, if Charlie's watching, like whether, like, why particularly that section of that act, because this seems to be all talking about, kind of purchasing land rather than where you're a landlord, but I might be wrong.
There. Sorry, you're going to say something, Karis?
Sorry, isn't this about despair and a prohibition order? Isn't that, and they have to refer to this? Or is that something different?
I don't honestly know because I haven't actually researched this, but I suppose if we just strip out this particular statutory question and say, well, is the question really what's the position of somebody who is a private tenant of a housing association if it's necessary to decant the residents? Does the housing association owe them a duty? Well, does the housing association or does the local authority have to rehouse them? Because is that I don't know if Charlie's watching, but is the question, do you want to be rehoused by the housing association or the local authority? And I suspect that it's always difficult with private landlords to say that there's a duty to provide decant accommodation because you say, well, where does the duty come from? It's not in the tenancy agreement. There's no sort of, as far as I'm aware, there's no Housing Act sort of blah blah that says Section 51. If you need to decant, then you have to. Well, there's an obligation to decant in the first place, but then on the other hand, there's an obligation to give. The tenant has a duty to give access for repair works, and the landlord has a duty to let the tenant have quiet enjoyment of their home. So that if during the course of a fixed term well, even during the course of a periodic tenancy, the landlord wants to gain access to carry out repair works, would the tenant not be entitled to say, well, I'm not giving you access unless you give me somewhere else while you're in there? Because the landlord would have to apply for an injunction. I suppose the landlord could say, look, it's dangerous, so we need to get access, but a judge may say, well, there's no obligation to rehouse, so I'm going to grant the injunction. But there is a provision, isn't there? Can you be in priority need where you're homeless as a result of an emergency?
Yeah.
You can, but I have a feeling that this wouldn't count because I think they're quite. Again, I'm kind of I haven't read this sort of stuff for quite some time, but they're quite specific about what would count as an emergency. So, for example, an illegal eviction wouldn't count. I don't think you would be, but again, I'm happy to be wrong on that one. I'm just doing a bit of googling myself, and there's no mention of that particular act. So you've got the Landlord and Tenant Act 1985 mentioned here. You've got Rent Act 1977, Housing Act 1988, but I can't see any mention of that particular legislation. So I don't know. I'm on the Shell website right now, just having a little dig around. So I don't know. It's talking about decanting, but it makes the point that most landlords don't have to.
Well,
So,
Charlie's provided a follow-up question here, hello, Charlie. Which is, yes, the question is, if a private tenant of a housing association is decanted, do they have to rehouse them if the block is knocked down? Well, I would say that if you look at it slightly differently, because if they're decanted, then they've already been rehoused. So what you really mean is, if they need to knock the property down, do they have to decant them? And I would have thought, arguably, yes, because, or put it another way, they're not going to be able to knock the place down until they've regained possession. So they can't just say, sorry, we need everyone out, we need to knock the place down. They'd have to say, we're claiming possession against you because I'm not sure what the statutory ground is, but I think there must be one if the landlord needs it back for essential works or something. So I think the answer would be no, there wouldn't be a duty to decant, because the duty would be to recover possession, and then the tenant would be to recover possession through the court, and then the tenant would be entitled to be rehoused by the local authority. Whereas,
And I think this means it refers to compensation, doesn't it?
would compensation be
Act.
payable? And what do you think? I'd say arguably not, because if they get a possession order, then there's nothing, they've lawfully terminated the tenancy. I'm trying to think of a situation where you would, if somebody was a council tenant and they've got a secure tenancy, then the local authority wouldn't be able to end it because they wanted to carry out works. They would have to decant them, wouldn't they?
I mean, I would say, like, pragmatically speaking, actually going to the local council now and ask, and essentially presenting to them, because the local council will be well aware of the if the building's about to be demolished, and they'll essentially have some kind of plan in action. Now, I'd imagine maybe a lot of the tenants are going to be social tenants, so maybe different rules apply. But the local council, this is there are situations where a local council will be helpful, and they will actually be informative. And so this might be one of them. It's a bit like, if you want a potentially an illegal eviction, the council is likely to be very helpful, because what the council is essentially going to be doing is trying to prevent you actually coming to them later on. So I think if we're not able to give a definitive answer tonight, then just emailing your local councillor as well, because again, the councillors, they'll be having lots of meetings about this behind the scenes. If a block of flats is getting knocked down, it's a big thing, and they'll be having some stuff going on behind the scenes where they're working out what the plan is, what's the different protocol for different types of tenants. And so I think if you were to also to contact your councillors, they would probably also already be well aware of the situation, and again would be well placed to kind of give you some advice. And again, usual rules apply. Make sure you get it in writing.
I'm just looking at Giles Peaker's, Jan Luber, Catherine O'Donnell, and Giles Peaker's book. And I'm looking up, there's no actual decanting, doesn't appear in the index, but temporary accommodation does. But only briefly. I'll just check 5.88, just see if that sheds any light. This is on their book on disrepair. So 5.8.
I guess a question that would be relevant in a situation like this is the tenant we're thinking of here, are they going to be in priority need? Because if they're not, then that's going to be a big problem. Like, so if they're not going to be in priority need and they approach the council down the line when they do become homeless, then there will be no duty to rehouse them from the council's point of view. Again, there might be a specific policy locally which kind of gives more support than would ordinarily be given, but I think that's going to be a key consideration here, because in one sense, if you're going to be in priority need, then at least you can relax a little bit and know that you are going to be somewhere. Appreciating it's kind of a very disruptive thing to have it all happen, but I think if you're not in priority need, then there's going to be some there's going to be some issues down the line potentially.
Yeah, I mean, the Giles's book says that where tenants need to leave temporarily, And this does cover private and housing association tenants as well, as the chapter does anyway. It says the local authority should assist with the provision or facilitation of alternative temporary accommodation. So I think that sort of answers that one in a way that it would fall to local authority rather than private social housing landlord to provide alternative accommodation. So unless anybody wants to ask anything else, I think that's probably covered
Yeah,
that.
I'm just going to kind of be just digging around a little bit in terms of that question of whether they'll automatically be in priority need as it been as an emergency. Because I
Yeah,
think again that's kind of raised that. It might be good to get something definitive on that as well.
yes, that would be good. Let me just see. What I might do this backwards rather than things to prepare to discuss. I could actually look up things to look into after the podcast, and then put it
Yeah,
on the next one. So we've got
I mean,
decant from how decant for
I mean, me and
repair work.
Karis can quite happy talk about supported accommodation whilst you're having to dig around. Well,
Oh yeah,
because
okay. Yeah,
yeah,
let's.
because I think we've both got rather strong opinions about it.
Okay,
So
so
yeah, I mean, Karis,
I'll
without
just put you
throwing any
back.
particular organisations under the bus, Karis, you want to just explain what you're saying before what you're seeing in your casework?
Um,
Sorry, I'll just get
should we explain what a supported accommodation is? So like,
Probably is worth it because it's interesting how it's like different district or different areas called supported accommodation different things. So what we're talking about, and without in any way insinuating that YMCA is kind of what we're talking about here, but so the YMCA is a well-known supported accommodation provider, although they do other things as well. So Mungo's does quite a lot around London. Um, there's probably plenty of others as well, but they're kind of so it's accommodation where I would call it a hostel, but it's not technically necessarily a hostel either, but where you apply to get in there, often it's usually for single homeless people or not always. And, you get a room and it's usually pretty rundown building, shared facilities, lots of people with lots of issues all in close proximity. You're supposed to get a key work once a week. And that is actually something which it should happen because that's what opens up the additional housing benefit that the provider gets. And basically, if you play your cards right, there's a lot of money in it. If you're a, kind of a cynical organization chief executive, doesn't even have to be a charity these days, but if you kind of want to make a lot of money, then you basically have a HMO, call it supported accommodation, pop your head in the door once every month or whatever, and run to the bank happy with all the money you're getting from housing benefits. So yeah, I don't know, do you want to add anything to that, Karis, or is that a reasonable summary of what supported accommodation is, what we're talking about?
yeah, and that they're provided for people who are facing homelessness, and the idea of them is to move them on. So it's moving on accommodation. Some domestic violence refugees are often described as supported accommodation as well. There were children. So it does have an umbrella term for quite a lot of situations.
Yeah, and then it's kind of split down into registered providers, which have some kind of standards that they're supposed to live up to in order to get like more money effectively. But then you've got the unregulated providers where essentially up until the Support Housing Act came in last year, there was literally nothing. And it's a shame Shannon's not here tonight because I think she inputted into that actual act because she was kind of meeting with, doing her other work kind of stuff. And so she knows kind of what the ins and outs are. There wasn't a lot of stuff which I found particularly interesting about it because it just seemed to be a lot of words that were coming out of the Tory government at the time. The reason it got picked up on was effectively it's costing councils a lot of money because they don't get the full housing benefit kind of reimbursed from central government, which is why councils care about it as well. Registered providers, I might be kind of being very clumsy here, but they don't really have to pay for it because it gets reimbursed by central government. I think all of it gets reimbursed, whereas unregistered providers, a certain amount of money that the council just basically loses, has to pay out of its own budget. So, and generally speaking, there's like an expectation you live there up to 2 years. That's pretty typical. But again, unregistered providers can be there forever pretty much because there's no move on policy. Like this is the problem. They'll tell you when you move in, oh yeah, we've got move on policy. We'll get you moved into your own flat or something in 2 years, and it's just a lie. They don't at all. And then you get people living there for 5 years, and they just generally kind of rot away really. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, as I say, Karis, what kind of situations have you been seeing in your casework?
So also when they want to end the tenancy or there's grievances, they're like, oh, well, you've stayed here. It's an excuse to evict people as well. Or you've come to the end of your 2-year stay with us, so you're prolonged the time. And also there's an age limit for younger people, but they'll put younger people in with older people. Drug and alcohol, I think that's a very hidden term, so they'll put them in there and they'll be like, oh, this is supported accommodation, but there's no, you know, I think Shannon was talking about in Westminster where they have psychiatrists go in there. There's no real actual support. If you have a key worker, that's what qualifies them to look after someone with years of drug and alcohol abuse, you know, especially if they're a younger person, or to support young people with mental health issues that or have come out of hospitalization. You know, what qualifies that key worker to support in that wide range of serious problems, and they could have serious consequences if they are dealt with inappropriately or, you know, improperly.
Yeah, I mean,
The quality of care is just not there.
yeah, I mean, so I used to work in supported accommodation, started there 20 years ago, and thought it was brilliant, but we were terrible. You know, we were doing a lot of damage to a lot of people. We were trapping people. We're a direct access supported accommodation, so we're kind of a night shelter basically. But we kind of, you know, there was another supported accommodation, a genuine hostel was part of the organisation, and I look back and just wince at pretty much everything we did. No qualifications, you know, basically the qualification is you're willing to just work very unpleasant hours, probably get quite a lot of flack, and, you know, for minimum wage effectively. That's kind of the criteria a lot of the time. And I know there's obviously exceptions to this, so, you know, I don't want to kind of tar everyone in the same brush, but the reality is that certainly in Bedford you've got these kind of big CIC type organisations who just kind of sprung up, and they make a lot of money. And when you talk to the people actually staying there, they never see any support workers or anything like that. As you say, Karis, there's kind of like all the sort of victimisation stuff. So if someone kind of raises a complaint, then they'll just kind of, you know, oh yeah, you've been here too long, off you go. So it's just a real kind of just a huge amount of just kind of power imbalance. One of my first clients I got compensation for was a supported accommodation worker, and they didn't know anything. Like, it's a really straightforward case in terms of, you know, what needed doing, and she did not know anything about anything. And I'm sure her clients would have almost always known more than she did about what options there were or anything like that. So I think it's kind of I would say a lot of supported accommodation workers think their role is, and their role effectively is just to keep the building as safe as possible, which isn't really possible, because if you put 20 people under one roof, doesn't matter how kind of stable they are or anything like that, there's going to be fallout and stuff. There's going to be some unpleasantness. So yeah, it's a bit of a racket, really, I guess, with some exceptions. You know, I quite like Emmaus. So Emmaus is technically supported accommodation, but it's quite a different model. So it's like it's national. So there's quite a few of them, but they work on site. And I know a lot of people say, well, you know, we're slave labour sort of things. We don't get paid properly, but I know a lot of people who've come through Emmaus and actually it did do them the world of good. So, you know, that structure and that kind of community was really good, and that's not something you see in the normal kind of the sort of hostel I'm thinking about. So yeah.
We see a lot of things, especially with trying to keep them on housing benefit. But if they work, they lose that housing benefit. So if you're trying to move them on into work and into stable accommodation, you take away their hours at work or reduce their benefit. So there's no happy medium to keep them in the work and keep them into and actually move them on. So a lot of people are told, just leave your job, you'll get housing benefit so you won't get rent arrears. So if they build up a rent arrears, they got a huge bill, liable to be actually homeless again when you've just taken them off being homeless. So it's kind of like a vicious circle, and the money making from keeping that person housed in that supported accommodation, there's no actual support in that, and no incentive to cover the cost, take the hit of the rent arrears and move them out sensibly. There's no incentive to do what they're actually planned to do.
So yeah, effectively the kind of the stable residents, for want of a better word, they're the ones that make them the most money. So that, you know, in one sense, if you kind of keep your nose clean, then actually there's an incentive for them to keep you there because you don't call any bother. And move them on. I mean, when the homelessness strategy happened this year in Bedford, and I went on a rant because we did some kind of formal feedback, but I just wrote in a letter as well, just basically saying, like, it's like the old, when hospitals were invented, you know, before hospitals you had roving doctors that went round, well, roving priests or whatever before that. And then you have medicine invented, and they want to be all important, so they kind of bring everyone to one place. And what they do is the death rate goes up fivefold because everyone's getting infected off each other. And I'd say it's a similar sort of thing when you're getting people with different social problems. And again, I'm using quite clumsy language, but you stick them all into one room or under one roof, then those problems are contagious. One of the most kind of depressing situations I saw at the night show was like a 16-year-old guy fell out with his dad. His dad was like, "Well, I'll teach him a lesson. He'll have to stay in the night shelter." And within 2 weeks, he's using heroin.
Bloody hell.
And last time I saw him, which is probably 5 years ago, so he looks like a wreck. You know, he's still probably in his late 20s by then. And yeah, so they're just environments which just suck the life out
You
of
are
people. Really.
exposing the most vulnerable into an environment. You're putting them into an environment which is completely unsuitable,
Yep.
and is exacerbating a problem because it's all heightened there because you're living with 20 other people. So fights can happen, things like that can happen, and young people, when you're putting them all of a sudden in a situation where, you know, they live with mum and dad, and then all of a sudden, you know, everything's broken down. You're going to end up with a mental health issue that is 100 times worse because they're in this situation without any real support, because the key worker is just going to come along, put their head down the door and be like, "Oh, you're still alive, so I'll go again."
Yeah. I did a really cool, a few years ago now, I did an interview with someone. As in, I was interviewing someone who basically, I knew him because he worked in the drug and alcohol sector. He'd been like abstinent for many years, and really cool guy. But he'd been written a real bad way in one of the sort of local towns. And he just talked. I just kind of find out about his experience. But he, one of the things he said was, you know, he basically said during his time in that situation, he was either in a night shelter, he was sofa surfing, he was in prison, or he was in custody. And he was alcohol dependent. He said the worst place was custody because you're withdrawing and it's just horrendous. But the next worst place is by far is kind of supported accommodation. So prison was basically better than supported accommodation for him. And that's a sentiment I've heard plenty of times elsewhere. To the point where I've known people, literally deliberately commit crime to go to prison because they were homeless, or they've kind of been in and out of the night shelter and stuff. So, but yeah, they call it supported accommodation and they're called charities, and that makes the public think that, you know, they're nice, they're good things. They're not. They're rubbish. And yeah, it's weird how we live in a world where the evidence for housing first is pretty good, and yet we're still kind of doing that old school sort of approach of horrendous accommodation and just kind of expecting people to move through, you know, up a staircase kind of thing. So yeah, what generally happens is people do it for a couple of years, staff do it for a couple of years, get experience, and go and work for somewhere else.
The staff turnaround must be, I mean, that sort of industry with the care and hospital industry is that care staff turnaround is really high. So you've also got the stigma of being in supported accommodation. How does that affect someone's, if they're working life and going into a tenancy accommodation? So you've got the stigma of coming from there in the first place when no one intends to end up homeless or intends to end up in a supported accommodation. But how must that affect the people around you and their own self-esteem? That's got to be in consideration as well, because you've got a vulnerable person and then you've put them there where everyone's going to look at them, and people do judge and stigmatize people in that situation in the first place. So that's not supportive, and so it's not, key workers are not set up to help them be not stigmatized from the rest of the community. They're like outcasts in a way. So they've got to then try and integrate them back into the community and job-wise and tenancies. And how does, you've got to set them up into a private tenancy, or if it's not social housing, you've got to then guarantee that that private tenant there's not going to be discrimination on that level of where they've come from, the supported accommodation. So it's incredibly hard for someone to go through that whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, Chief's just saying, don't forget having to pay rent in support accommodation, which is a large chunk of any benefit given. They take this on top of HB. So yeah, there's like a service charge.
Yeah.
And many times actually, it actually comes in helpful from a legal homelessness point of view. So I've worked with people who were in normal supported accommodation, the service charge was so high that it was actually unaffordable for them. Then they get kicked out for bad behaviour sometimes, but they're not intentionally homeless because it was never actually reasonable to be there in the first place. So it's kind of you can use that. You've got to do the maths on it. That was a particularly expensive unit in Bedford that I'm thinking of there. But yeah, so you as you said, Karis, like, so people are paying for the support work, but they're not. I would say in terms of that situation you're talking about before, so where someone's basically paying out their own pocket for this so-called support, but they're not getting any support work for months, is do a subject access request and just look at what the kind
The
of
support
records are.
plans, care plans
Yeah.
are.
Yeah, well, just minutes of the key works. There aren't any,
Yeah.
so it's like, yeah, where's the money going?
Internal meetings aren't there. Where are they? So where's your
Yeah.
support plan then? What's the next steps? Well,
Yeah.
open minute meetings aren't there. But also they're paying for, maintenance of the accommodation, so cleaning, gardening, any management of the building, so like grounds works. And that's some of these accommodations are not fit for purpose. They've been given to them by the council if they're charity run or industry run, and they're just not fit for purpose.
Yeah.
So can I ask, just join in this bit? I'll come back to the outcome of my research in a sec. But do you think we're at the stage with supported housing where we'd have to say it's actually not working? I mean, it's broken as a concept, or is it just a few bad apples and there's a sort of load of really good supported housing out there which we're just failing to recognise?
So, I mean, my view is it's a systemic thing. It's not just a few bad apples, though certainly some are worse than others. But I think the problem is you've got a whole homeless sector is basically now dependent on homeless people. So you can think of a homeless person as being worth money. They're not getting money, but if they're kind of dealt with in a certain way by professional services, the services are getting money for them. And it's not. I'm not just talking about housing benefit there, although that's a big factor. But say you've got someone who is going to drug and alcohol service, mental health services, all the debt advice, whatever. Those services all get money for that person turning up, and actually, there's no requirement on that money to sort that person out. Kind of actually help them leave the sector. So you've got in my experience, and I've got a fairly low opinion, as you might tell, of kind of the type managers, type of supported accommodation type projects, because they think they say they're amazing. I don't know if they actually believe that or not, but they just perpetuate various myths, and and they'll say things like, "Oh, one day we hope to not have a job anymore." It's like, no, that's not true. You've been doing this 20 years. There's absolutely no sign you're doing anything useful at all or anything different than what you had before. So you're just basically you've just got this unending revolving door of people to make money out of, and there's no kind of doesn't matter if you do a good job or not. In fact, if you do a good job and actually house people and get them out of the sector, then that's actually bad for you. And that's so I just think it stinks. But I don't think you're ever going to get rid of it because you've just got this kind of churn of charities kind of popping up and kind of doing the next big thing, and then they just kind of fade out again and all that sort of stuff. So I just think it's we're stuck with them. We're stuck with them as a model. So I don't know what you do with them other than just kind of have a pop at them every so often. But
The other, sorry, yeah, go on. No, you speak. Sorry, Karis.
It's institutionalized. We used to have workhouses in the 1800s, and it's the same sort of thing. And also, if there's someone that's in priority need, there's no incentive to get them out of accommodation, and for that manager to fight with the local authority who funds them and gives them basically their money to keep the institution open. So they're not going to say, no, actually, you should be housing this person because it's your job, because they're vulnerable, because they're in priority need. You have a duty here. They're not going to say any of that. They're just going to be like, oh, that one can go in room 5. That one's filled. That's our £2,000 a month from the government that's going to pay us. So that manager's just going to be like, okay, they're not going to row with their cash cow, really. And there's adverts. You see adverts. Oh, a good investment in this socialite will help people get housed. So they advertise for people to invest in this type of a supported accommodation, which is terrible.
So do you think it's because I mean, we've got a couple of sort of systemic problems there. One is that it's based on a sort of Victorian or even Tudor sort of vision of the poor. You've got the deserving poor, and you've got the sort of scurvy knaves or whatever they used to call them, who would be whipped out of the parish and stuff. But because presumably that's what there seems to be a sort of low threshold of tolerance for behaviour that manifests itself as a result of the consequences of being homeless. So if somebody is very angry and confrontational, that may be because they've had a shit life, and it's to be expected. But to say, well, we're not going to tolerate somebody shouting at our staff is to miss the whole point. I think that's the point that in the book, which I think we need to devote a lot of sessions on, the Clustered Injustice book by Luke Clements. He was saying that the problem, you get labelled as difficult, where you should be labelled as sort of damaged, or labelled as in need of help. But the only other problem is, you've got, as you say, Mike, you've got an industry which is sort of like they say about the pharmaceutical industry. If they came up with a cure for a cold, a lot of companies would sort of try and suppress it because they make a lot of money selling cold remedies. So we got that. But then the other side of the coin is that we do need. I mean, there is a need for supported housing in the proper sense of the word. But like the word social services, if you say it, it means something completely different to what it actually is, which is social services. So that you would get services to help you, but it's become a meaning of authoritarian guardian reader types, sort of. You know what I mean? It's most people don't want anything to do with them.
In the same way that housing officers have got ridiculous amount of power with no accountability, so it's the same with hostel workers.
Yeah,
Like, so
I was gonna say.
when I went to the night show, like I did things I'm ashamed of. I barred like women in the middle of the night because they had medication and a mobile phone on them, which was, that's 2 warnings, or that's an immediate barring. It was there was no, I don't know, there was no one
Regulating you.
Yeah, no one regulating us. Well,
Regulation.
technically the council were, but again, the council didn't. The council
Ever
they
come
treated
in?
it like just a garbage dump, but they're people they didn't want in there. And then we're kind of just trying to make sense of it all. But I've only ever worked with 2 people who chose supported accommodation with the option of their own place, and one of them instantly regretted it. The other person chose it because she was long-term victim of domestic abuse and she felt safe with the staff. And it's like, okay, there's an element of support which would work well, but these days a lot of supported accommodation is staffed 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, which just means at the weekends it's just a zoo.
Free for all. Yeah, but also people are told, we'll help you, come in here, we'll help you move on and sort you out. So they're given promises that aren't fulfilled. And then it's like, oh, they're still years 2 years later realizing none of this has come to fruition. So you've got that aspect of they're actually drawing people in and encouraging people to come in instead of going to private accommodation.
The challenge I put out when I have these kind of arguments with hostel workers, I'd say, well, if you're good, then why are you not supporting the people approaching applying to live in your project to make a homeless application as well, fighting the council and you kind of get, because most people who are going to support accommodation will be in priority needs. So just showing, basically saying to them, here's an option. We make a homeless application and that's a route out of homelessness, or you want to live here. The reality is most people won't do it. The reason, Will, that you have that kind of, they have low tolerance of people with kind of difficult behaviours, is that they just have an unending stream of people. So it doesn't matter that they're rubbish at supporting people, because if one person doesn't fit very well there, they just kick them out and get another person who's hopefully a bit quieter and can make them more money. I think the whole thing about, if you think about homelessness law as a kind of it's civil rights by definition, what charities do is they'll take money from the council, and the council implicitly or explicitly say, don't challenge us on the gatekeeping stuff, basically, and the charity bosses say, yeah, okay, I'll take that money. So they're kind of trading in those rights of the people they're supposed to be all about and about helping and stuff, and in exchange for a funding contract which doesn't really suit anyone. I mean, the workers themselves are like, get burnt out. It's not a healthy way of living or healthy place to work. But you just got this really kind of, in my view, very sinister kind of stuff going on. It's not the only sector. Plenty of charities are like that. And as I say, there are exceptions to it. There are good places.
Yeah.
So
Well,
who do
Also,
good.
when you've got difficult people, they sometimes will turn a blind eye and just be like, oh, well, they're difficult, and just carry on and be like, okay. And there's no one here on Friday. Hopefully, they're more difficult after the Friday when they're unattended. So they genuinely don't deal with. I hate the word difficult when people say that.
Yeah, me too.
I
But
think everyone has the right to be difficult.
Yes. what I think we should try and do is keep this going as a theme, because I think in the wake of the things like the post office scandal, which I'm always going on about, you know, the thing is you have to monitor the institutions, and it's if people need to be talking and almost saying that there's an innate corruption, isn't there, with charity. Somehow I was listening to an audio book about, I think it was somebody was reminding me on the book about Live Aid. Now, you guys may not remember Live Aid, but the principles are there, that it seems like great and everybody's sort of hugging themselves for being so virtuous, raising money for Ethiopia. But there's a whole lot of really sinister stuff underneath there, that Africans are only recipients of charity. And in fact, Africa's just one country, and the money all ended up in arms dealers' hands and stuff. And so, and also I remember, you know, the lyrics of the song are sort of cringy.
It still gets
So-
played. We'll still have it this December.
Sorry?
It'll still be on Radio 1 come December. Like,
Yes, although I didn't
guarantee it.
realise they'd done a remake of it a couple of years ago, and they had to
I
take
think
out
they
some
did a
of the-
couple.
And I
So I
think
think there's like Live Aid 85, and then there's like Live Aid 89, and then there's like Live Aid 2010 or something like that. But yeah, there's some good books on this sort of thing. So there's one, I can't remember what it's called, but it calls it the charitable industrial complex. So it's basically it's kind of looking at prisons in
That's
the
good.
US, which are kind of like, you know, kind of how do you make money by keeping people inside, and this kind of expanding the same kind of principles to the charity sector. And there's some, so yeah, again, I'd say anyone who works in the sector, there's a couple of really essential books. So one is called Toxic Charity, which is a genuinely fantastic book, just kind of unpicks a lot of stuff. There's another one called The Most Good You Can Do by Peter Singer, which is again really
I should
interesting.
be, sorry, I should be writing. Can you
Yeah,
put
so
these in the
Toxic
chat or
Charity,
something, Mike? When you've got, I'll try and put them in
yeah,
the show notes.
I'll put them in the chat. Yeah,
Books
bear
on
with me.
charities. But of course, the other
Yeah, give me
thing
2 minutes.
is that it's not just the private sector, because the public sector. I mean, if we think about institutions that are run by local authorities, and the most obvious one being the care system for children. And again, the word care being sort of almost sort of Kafkaesque there, because it sort of means or Orwellian. It means almost the opposite, because traditionally, if you said somebody's been in care, you almost expect them to be damaged by the process, because traditionally there'd be ghastly institutions which were very badly monitored for things like paedophiles and just general mistreatment of children. And nobody cared really. We were more worried about the institutions. So I think the only way you can deal with this is for people to keep talking about it. But having said that, I don't want this to seem like just some sort of you know, sort of Maoist struggle session on people trying to help. So if there's anybody out there from from charities or, you know, local authorities, please do get in touch. It'd be great to have you as a guest and to hear from you as to why if you do disagree with us, or what you think the solutions are, because none of us can deny that people do need support and they need housing, and there will be people who can't live independently. Whether the answer is that if you institutionalize it and put them in some sort of modern workhouse, it's going to go bad inevitably, or whether you say we just got to make the resources to have people getting support in their own homes. But well, anyway, that we're aware of the sort of Rubik's cube of it all. But hopefully we can keep talking about that. But sorry, Mike, did I cut you off? You were. I've got.
No,
Oh,
I
hang on.
just put 4 types, because you just talking about the care, like childcare sort of type stuff. There's a book by Len Cisse, who's like a poet. You might see him on TV actually. He's a really cool guy. He did a biography called My Name Is Why, and it's really interesting because he talks about his kind of time in care in the 70s, but crucially, he did a subject access request, so he's got a copy of his records, and you kind of see the sort of nonsense that were happening between these different departments. But there's one social worker who he said, you can see it in the social worker's notes, who basically fought for Lem. He just said, Lem's a good kid. We need to kind of give him another chance, all that sort of stuff. And Lem would say, or Lem does say that, that particular social worker had a massive impact. So I think there's what was it? There's a really good, I can't remember if it's Alice Miller. So Alice Miller's like a psychiatrist, German psychiatrist. I think she does a lot of stuff about kind of childhood trauma and stuff in later life. But she talks about the enlightened. I think it's her, just the enlightened witness, the model of the enlightened witness, who is essentially someone in a kid or an adult's life who who is just kind of witnesses what they're going through and just kind of is with them in a kind of positive way. They might not be able to stop all the stuff that's happening to them, but and there's another model called The Adolescent Chum by Harry Stack Sullivan. Again, just kind of this idea that, particularly in sort of adolescence, if you've got someone with you who is kind of, a good friend, who kind of, you lean on each other, then that's a really good protective factor for later life stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff around this. And there are some interesting things which happen in supported housing. So there was the Places for Change funding that came in like 15 years ago. And you had certain projects with kind of, really kind of the actual physical environment of the buildings would kind of improve massively. But again, you have the same problem of sticking 30 or 60 or 200 people under one roof. And ultimately, one thing those places are not is a home. Home is something different. So yeah, so I could literally talk about this all day, because this is kind of really interesting stuff in terms of kind of what I've seen in the career. I'm sure we've got some horror stories of this kind of stuff that happens in these types of institutions. There's the Facebook group Housing Advice UK. Yeah, Housing Advice UK. The admin, he posted a kind of couple of posts over the weekend. One was about sort of institutional abuse and kind of the power dynamics and that sort of stuff. There's a lot of really interesting stuff within it. So out of all the groups on Facebook, if you're homeless yourself, I'd say Housing Advice UK is a really good one to join. There are still some dickheads in it, but that's normal. So
Also, sorry, chucking in some, as it's Will's channel, the legal side of supported accommodation. You're usually on a license, so it gives you really limited protection for like tenancy rights. And I think that's something really questionable, that they should have more rights than they do living in there, because they're usually from homeless and they're facing no other way. And if there's someone that's not in priority need and has no duty from the under the council, you have them on a license, which gives them really limited protection and tenancy rights. So they're in a really precarious position, and that's not addressed. And that is something they should scrap. I think they should give them an actual tenancy and explain how to deal with it. It would be like a starter tenancy, a reduction, although that gives them limited rights, but it could help them in their sense of moving on. You can then explain what the tenancy is, take photos when you start your tenancy of the room, so when they try and if you have a deposit, things like that, you'd really teach them that kind of thing if they're a young person. But I think they often get notices to quit, so it's really limited protection and any defence for them. So it's really precarious that you're putting a vulnerable person in that situation anyway, and that's not explained to them in the beginning of that tenancy, and they have to sign it because they don't really feel they have any other choice. It's kind of like signing under duress anyway.
No, it is.
At the end, it's will law.
There's some, sorry for going off too much for a tangent. There's some stuff that come through sort of central government and Homes Link to kind of push towards using tenancies rather than licenses, and also situations where essentially the staff don't work for the landlord, because then you can have this ridiculous conflict of interest where so your support staff should be independent from the landlord. If you've got a problem with the landlord, you can talk openly about it. You're not worried about kind of saying the wrong thing and getting kicked out.
The keywords are which you pay for, but the landlord employs. So needs to be a separation.
Yeah, exactly. There's that kind of, there's some things which are out there which kind of improve the existing model, but I just think it's doomed. I just think it's doomed for the reason of you can never, as you say, well, like people might need support. Well, like, okay, support them in their own homes. Don't just go, have it dispersed. Have a normal home, and just kind of go in there to support them as much as they want to be supported. Yeah. I've said it before as well. Like, I've worked with people who are meant to be unhousable because they keep getting evicted from supported housing. When they get their own place, they're fine. It's mostly just people. It's mostly dealing with staff. Again, I did an interview for the local paper a little while ago, and interviewed a guy who'd been through all the hostels, and he said the more staff there are, the worse it is. And
really,
he's about as an expert as you're ever going to find. He's been around houses everywhere in Bedford.
So the more staff there are, the worse it is. How does that work? Because that sort of sounds like the complete. You'd think the solution is more staff, because then everyone can have a support work.
It's because they're not. It's because they're butting up against people. They're people with different. I mean, this particular guy had a short temper, but like not in a way. He wouldn't kind of be abusive to you. He just kind of get very angry. He was never violent, never threatening or anything like that. He'd just get very angry. Like if I don't know, you just catastrophize basically everything. You know, something went wrong, you kind of just get really emotional about it. And yeah, that's I'm trying to get out for you. Well, it went into the local press. He did kind of talked about that sort of stuff. And just how, you know, most support workers just are coming from this kind of authoritarian critical parent type mindset, and just doesn't work. And then you get, like, you know, occasionally you get good workers who see through it, and then they kind of often sort of trapped within that organization as well, and can't really do a lot about it either.
You throw more key workers in it, you've got more difference of opinion. So if you've got a vulnerable person trying to work with one person, and that person changes every 2 days and are on and off shifts, they don't know if they're coming or going. So if you put more staff in, you've got another one and more staff to butt heads with, then they're like, oh, he's really difficult, and then we're going to say the same thing, or they can twist things, and you get like a gang mentality, and you've got like a mob of staff. It's just putting more staff in. It's just with no control over the staff, so because you've got no manager that's really doing their job.
Yeah, again, like one of the kind of the good model type things, which I think are really good, is where, and I saw it. So 15 years ago in Bedford, this actually existed. There was actually service that did this. They would work with someone from the streets. They float in support effectively, work with someone from the streets through the hospital system, out the other end, but they would be with them. And so that person didn't have to tell their story to like 15 people on that journey. They just tell them to one person. That person would do a good job of advocating for them. You know, the workers were really high quality workers, and you know, they were working with the most, you know, chaotic, use that word, people in Bedford who, you know, often were at the end of their life because they were just kind of in such a bad way, and they would, you know, almost like 100% success rate of getting them housed and kind of getting them, and they would continue supporting them into that accommodation for potentially, you know, many years. So I mean, that's I think that's another kind of a model that works. It just doesn't pay well. The problem is that
there's no money in that.
Yeah. The problem is the hostel system is kind of based on this sort of unregulated support accommodation. That's the only way to make money. Yeah. So yeah, as I said, I mean, I talk. Yeah, I've never been in a support accommodation myself. I worked in it and just thought this is awful. But everyone, I don't know anyone who would say, you know, overall good things. I mean, you'll have people say good things about particular kind of characteristics about different different projects they were living in, but yeah, overall it's kind of depressing. And I think I'm going to shut up in a minute, but the final thing I say is that supported accommodation, you know, the type of managers I've put up against, the managers would say, oh, you know, I spoke to a resident today, they said it was great here, and I'm like, you're the fucking manager. If the person doesn't say that to you, they're scared you're going to kick them out. So they're going to, when they're with you, they're going to say all the nicest things in the world to you because they're scared. It's not, you know, there's just no insight from the manager thinking, you know, there must be a better way to actually get genuine feedback. Anyway, I'm genuinely going to stop talking now because, I will go on all night.
Yeah, it's we could go on for a while on that one, but the hopefully we can carry on talking about this because it is an important subject, and I guess another one will be, I guess it's the sort of inevitable. The theme of it is the sort of inevitable corruption of well-intentioned services, whether it's the HPU, the homeless persons unit model generally, which has structural systemic problems, care system, supported housing. We could go on, couldn't we? I mean, the prison service. But it's that's probably enough on it for today because we've actually got quite close to the end of the hour. But it's been a really interesting conversation. I hope people listening I wouldn't say necessarily enjoyed it, but found it useful. And we can carry on talking. As I say, it'd be great to hear from anybody with lived experiences of either how bad it is, because usually with these things you find that despite us ranting about it, the reality is even worse than we like with your video, Mike, about that woman who had the problems in Luton. Forgive me for not remembering the name, but when I was watching this, I thought, oh my God, you know, I've been complaining about this sort of stuff, but this is just so much worse. If somebody had said this to me and it wasn't real, I would say, oh, I don't think you're exaggerating a bit. It's not that bad. You wouldn't get 3 social workers saying they take your children into care for being homeless. But there you go. So if there's anything people would like to talk about, I'll try and do a blog post or something and drum up some ideas. But back again next week on this one, and on Mike's. I think because Mike, your video session is much more well established. So it's almost you've got a sort of a lot of questions coming up to answer. But this is quite a good space at the moment for just having a chat for an hour. But maybe we can do something different, make it more
I'd also
informed.
say, I'd also say if people watching do have questions, then this is actually a really good one, because whereas on the Thursday one we're quite rushed, actually in this one we can probably go into a bit more detail and kind of explore things in a bit more. So yeah, so
I might put
get the
some questions
coming in.
out there. Because I think I'm getting to the stage now where I'm confident enough with the technology side of it, and that we've done. I think this is the third or fourth one, but I can start putting things on Twitter or X, or whatever it's called, and other social media. So with that, I think I'll finish for now, unless there's no other questions out there. Hello, Dave. Thank you for your comment, which is still up there, which is I'll take down now. And I didn't say hello to you, Cheeseface, but I think we posted one of your, well, more than one of your comments, and Abina. So hopefully see you again next week, and I will end the meeting here then. Bye. Actually, I'm gonna just stop streaming. Sorry, I'll do that.